Will we ever solve the problem of evil? Not if we continue tolerating and even indulging tyrannies like Putin's or Xi Jinping's or North Korea, Iran, or Cuba, where my family's from. Not to mention the number of other dictatorships in nations most people don't even know exist. And yes, there are other forms of evil on this planet aside from dictatorships. Other categories would be terrorist organizations like Hamas, or criminal cartels and violent gangs that make life insufferable for innocent people unfortunate enough to live among them. Then, of course, there's serial killers, mass shooters, rapists, child molesters, and a whole host of mostly sadistic psychopaths and mentally unstable individuals who live miserable lives and therefore decide to take it out on others to make them feel their pain. We not only tolerate, we seem to even embolden tyrants like Putin in Russia or the Castro regime in Cuba. Even Osama bin Laden, who was not a dictator, but was the textbook definition of a terrorist, has been honored with a posthumous makeover, where some people are trying to laud this man as a hero who stood up to Western imperialism and colonialism, as if his personal brand of Islamic extremism didn't make his own family's lives living hells without any help from the West. It's important, of course, to define the term evil, or at least clarifying what evil is not. Evil is not about demonic spirits carrying out a spiritual battle between Satan and God. This is demonstrably fabricated nonsense and is as fictitious and imaginary as any ancient mythology or even fairy tales people still tell their children about big bad wolves that will come and eat you alive, which used to happen hundreds of years ago and probably still does in certain parts of the world. And it's something many people forget and wonder why children's fairy tales can be so gruesome and even terrifying to adults who forget how the stories ended. But those stories served as cautionary tales for children who lived in villages where actual wolves and other large predatory animals could and would sneak into a hut or cottage and do what wolves and other carnivores do: eat other living organisms in order to survive. And this is just how reality actually works, unfortunately, for us thinking, feeling, and slightly over-emotional human beings. It can be said suffering is the curse of having a higher level of consciousness that other forms of life do not experience. The fact that our brains can process positive emotions like love and joy means we're also susceptible to pain and suffering. Ironically enough, we need to suffer to a certain extent. It's how we learn. Pain and suffering function as built-in organic alarm systems. It's what lets you know something is wrong and needs to be resolved or avoided at all costs. This is why survivors of lightning strikes who lose all their physical sensations, including their sense of smell, are at a high risk of hurting themselves when they don't know something is extremely hot, or so freezing cold it can cause freezer burns. Sure, they'll never have to worry about smelling someone else's farts, but it's helpful to know if something smells rotten before you eat it. Which is why the question, why does God allow suffering, completely misses the point, and in a sense gets it the other way around. Because it's precisely why people have fabricated tens of thousands of gods throughout history. Because our minds reflexively need a superhero, usually in the form of a fearsome father figure, to save us from anything that threatens our well-being and survival. This is why suffering happens. It's essentially a byproduct of evolution. But not all suffering is necessary or inevitable. A lot of the suffering going on in the world can be avoided to begin with. But there are some people who insist on inflicting pain onto others for their own selfish gain. And this is what can be called evil, and why it is such a useful word. Because it helps us quickly identify something that isn't good for us, and even intentionally harmful, not to mention extremely painful. And throughout history, some people have tried to solve the problem of evil as if it's some spiritual battle to be decoded. Scholars and philosophers, especially theologians, have tried to make sense of evil, but they haven't done a great job of minimizing it, let alone stopping it, because too many people have erroneously concluded that evil is part of some mysterious grand plan where everything will be revealed once we are in heaven with God, as if this sky daddy is going to sit every single human being on his lap and one by one explain why horrors such as the Holocaust had to happen, why thousands of years of slavery were par for the course, and why so many countless wars were actually a good thing to help us appreciate peace before and after the wars. After all, how can we appreciate light if it weren't for the dark? These are silly and even stupid approaches to understanding suffering and evil, and it continues getting people needlessly killed by the thousands on a daily basis. Because the humanitarian crises going on around the world right now in hotspots like the Middle East, Ukraine, Haiti, and so many other parts we forget even exist, these can all be stopped and avoided altogether for the future. But we need to acknowledge and admit who are the ultimate culprits. In the case of Ukraine, it is undoubtedly Putin, not Zelensky nor NATO. In Israel, it is clearly Hamas that has put Palestinians in harm's way, not to mention the outright falsehood that is Islam and the amount of horribly bad ideas that come with such a religion that punishes apostasy with death. And in Haiti, it's hard to pinpoint if the collective self-flagellation of so many Haitians is due to the corruption of their government or some gang leader named Barbecue who was a former police officer and got that nickname from burning people alive. Once we acknowledge and admit who these people are, we can no longer continue wasting time indulging them and trying to comply with their demands or wonder what traumatic childhoods they must have suffered. We can't keep engaging these people the way ancient theologians tried to decode the meaning of suffering and evil, only to arrive at the conclusion, who are we to judge if we can barely understand the mind of God? It's not that difficult to understand the mind of God when you accept He never existed in the first place. When you realize that every single God has been created by men, not the other way around. Every one of the tens of thousands of gods has been nothing more than the result of a personification reflex in our minds that causes us to look at aspects of nature we have yet to understand or control, so we identify them as people. And some of these characters are harmless symbols for things to help guide us through life, much like tales of big bad wolves did for children. It's why we have characters like Mother Nature and Father Time. But some of these other characters have become looming figures of authority in our minds and actually do us more harm than good in trying to understand reality and how to solve the very problems that inspired them in the first place. And then these very gods get used against us. It's why one of the top bishops in Russia, like Bishop Kirill, openly stated that God put Putin in power after the invasion of Ukraine. And how can you doubt that when Putin wears a Christian crucifix on his neck? Which is another irony, the fact that an ancient instrument of torture and death became the very symbol for a religion that has blinded billions of people for thousands of years from realizing they are glorifying human sacrifice and even cannibalism every Sunday at church when they partake in the drinking of wine and eating a tasteless wafer that represents the blood and flesh of Christ. It's easy to conclude that we as humans are too stupid for our own good and that it's a miracle we've evolved this far in time. But it's not that we're too dumb to be worthy of evolution. It's that evolution itself is a long, arduous process of trial and error, since the only constant in life is change. And sometimes that change can be violent and therefore painful. But a lot of that change can be stopped and avoided, especially when we can see and admit who are the progenitors of needless, selfish change and what their ulterior motives are. Evil doesn't just happen when good men do nothing. Evil happens when good people bend over and take it. When people forget that compassion and tolerance have their limits. And that limit is forgiving people who have killed others and will kill you if you don't kill them first. Yes, it's very helpful to follow the golden rule. Don't do unto others as you don't want others to do unto you. But when someone's going to kill you and you don't want to be killed, all bets are off if you want to keep living. And it's as if too many people don't value their lives the way dictators, terrorists, crime bosses, serial killers, and too many other sadistic psychopaths seem to value their own. Too many people become needless victims of tragedy because they think it's just as evil to stop someone from killing you by killing them instead. The solution to evil is not that complex. It's about finding the balance between following the golden rule and remembering the law of the jungle. There's a time and place to be kinder than necessary, and there's a time and place to kill or be killed, especially when someone who enjoys breaking the golden rule by imposing the law of the jungle onto others. If I got anything wrong in this video, please let me know in the comments below. But if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell for upcoming videos, and check out the links below for my original art and merchandise. And thanks for watching.